we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence, indeed, will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes, and accordingly all experience hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable, than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably that the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty, to throw off such government, and to provide new guards for their future security. Paragraph 2 of the Declaration of Independence. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to episode number 11 of the GapFillers podcast. My name is Michael Bradford, and let's get started here. So, President Trump has authorized airstrikes in Yemen in order to, quote, stop the attacks on commercial vessels in the Red Sea. The Florida Senate has authorized, is looking at end arounds the referendum to the Constitution of Florida for the minimum wage, and all while introducing another bill that will roll back the rural designations that are set up in local municipalities and neighborhoods. This all goes on, but first I want to hit on one of the major topics of this past week, which is the municipal elections in Orange County. As I've been covering before, there was 5 municipal elections in Orange County and 56 throughout the state. I'm not sure how the rest of the state turned out overall, but they were pretty low in the single digits when I looked at Pinellas County and a few others. But here in Orange County, we had a voter turnout of 12%, ladies and gentlemen, 12%. That is how many people voted for their mayor or city official. That's not like all of Orange County. That is the eligible voters within these 5 municipalities. Within Winter Park, Belle Isle, Windermere, Maitland, Ocoee, all these municipalities here only had 12% voter turnout. So what does this tell us? This tells us there is a major disconnect in government between where the government power really lies and what people focus on. People are so focused on national elections, what's going on at the federal level, that they often overlook the forest for the trees. And they, instead of seeing the trees, they only see the forest on that one. Where they try to look at the grand big picture of the federal government, but miss the tyranny that can go on at home just as much. This kind of ties into the Senate bill that they're really looking at getting rid of the rural designations in Florida, and all this is just another hit against rural Florida and the agriculture and basically it's a way of these developers that seem to be co-opting the GOP, and the Democrats aren't exempt from this, but the GOP has a supermajority in Congress in the Florida legislature. So basically all this is going to do is, so like Christmas, right? So Christmas was really trying to limit the amount of homes that can be built on a square on an acre per acre. You would have to, in order to build a home, you would have to have it be a certain size per acre, so only a certain amount of people live in that community. Now, this is where I really struggle with this. You can do with your land what you want. The problem is that if I buy 5 acres and in a rural area, because I want to live in a rural area, I don't have to buy 1,000 acres in order to have room. If I know this area is going to be rural, I can buy those 5 acres and not have a problem. But when the government comes in and says, "Hey, you can build anything you want," then I have to worry about the guy beside me selling his, and a developer coming in and building townhomes right beside me. And this is why there are zoning laws and stuff like that, which I despise at the same time. It's really a catch-22, because what you can't afford to buy 1,000 acres, but at the same time, if this could encourage people to buy 1,000 acres and hoard all that land just to still have the rural designations. Maybe that's what it ends up being. But the problem is that it gets all the poor rural people that can't afford to buy 1,000 acres. This is happening in East Orange County for as long as I can remember. And they wanted to stop the urban sprawl, so they were able to get the county designation as rural, and so there weren't as many townhomes and these cookie cutter homes being built out in East Orange. The problem is that now that there's a housing shortage, in Florida is at the same time really hampering the sizes of condos that can be built due to their restrictions on that because of what happened down the collapse of that building down in Miami. Basically what they're doing now is they're going too far in the opposite direction, and they want to develop every piece of square inch of real estate in Orlando until we have nothing but parking lots, strip malls, and cookie cutter homes, suburban nightmares as far as the eye can see. I don't want to hamper on that too much because I've talked about that a lot in the previous 10 episodes, but I just want you to I want to be aware of there needs to be a balance between rural and urban. And the more urban people that move in, frankly, they vote more Democrat. So it's harder to create a sustainable economy that can foster growth, not and instead of being services. And so if you want to get into manufacturing and all that, you're not going to see that in a suburban area with strip malls and franchises and all that. You're not going. That's not what's built in that kind of area. Those are built, primarily in industrial zones in cities, or in rural areas where they have a couple town or a couple shops and stuff like that. So. Or you have these really small towns that are focused around a mill. So those are something to watch out for. Just watch out for that Senate bill. The other Senate bill that we should focus on is basically a reform of the internship laws. So the Republicans, this bill has just gotten out of committee. Basically, are trying to get around the voter referendum to the Constitution that for minimum wage. Now, I am 100% against the minimum wage because the minimum wage is always zero. The problem is that inflation always basically steals your money away and taxes your money away. Inflation is the most regressive of taxes because it steals the workers' money away that are focused on buying on purchasing value. The problem is that a lot of times, especially when there's steep inclines, in inflation, that there's a disconnect. Well, I used to pay $5 for this. Well, back in my day, I could afford to. I worked for $2 in 1940. Well, then you can buy $2 in 1940 went a whole lot farther than that does now, especially because of the fiat currency we have since the 1970s. So, this is so anyways, we're trying to get they're trying to get around this because the minimum wage prices unskilled workers out of the marketplace, and so companies will look for ways to not hire people or not hire as many people if they have to pay you more than they value that labor. So the thing one of the jobs that was brought up was bag boys, right? Nobody wants to pay $13 for a bag boy, to bag groceries, and that price is, possibly a teenager or, somebody that needs to get back on their feet out of a job. And so the whole idea is, this will allow them to opt out of having a minimum wage being classified as an intern. And so it allows interns are allowed to opt out of minimum wage overall, and this would allow them to get real world experience in the labor market, and that will allow them to put something on their resume and all that, and so. It really comes down to the details. This just got out of committee, so it has a lot farther to go. It might be there might be more details added to it, like classifications of an intern, restrictions on what is allowed to be an intern and not an intern. One of the Republicans' major supporters pointed out that that there already are interns working for nothing. They work for free. And that'll the whole point of an internship is to gain work experience, and so this allows the interns to opt out of a full minimum wage and work for say $10 or $5 or just something really simple. Now the Democrats have made a good point is what is classified as an intern. And that really comes down to the nitty gritty of bills and law, and so there needs to be a classification of that. But overall, I'm against the minimum wage, so I guess it really doesn't matter what as long as somebody can get a job for whatever their labor is the value of their labor is determined at. So the big thing the big thing I really want to cover this week is the strikes in Yemen. So the U.S. has really not made a good foreign policy decision in like 25, 30 years, maybe even 50 years. There's been we take out one warlord and replace it with 1,000 terrorist groups. It's happened most recently in Syria. We get rid of Assad, and then you get these Muslims, that come in and start exterminating Christians. Well, there's at some point, not everybody is worthy of being, in a democracy, and sometimes, that's why a strong man is in a position that they are. And we helped take out Gaddafi in Libya, and the Christians have been extremely persecuted there ever since. They had a tentative deal with Gaddafi. The Christians there did about how to interact in their society. Now Gaddafi was no good guy. None of these warlords are. Gaddafi, Assad, Saddam Hussein. None of these warlords or dictators are really good guys. The problem is that that whole part of the world is not a good guy. Because we get them out of power, and then all of a sudden you got ISIS, and then all of a sudden you got people, failed states all over the region because none of these people groups are getting along. With in Iraq with Saddam Hussein, you had the Kurds being persecuted. Okay, well, they're being persecuted there, okay? But they're also being persecuted in Turkey. How come we don't do anything about that? Because they're a NATO ally? Where does that ball end? We're going to stop the persecution of this people group, but not this people group. Why? Because, who cares about the Rwandans in the DRC, or who cares about the different tribes there? The logical fallacy of people are being persecuted, therefore we must overthrow that government, doesn't make sense, because then we would basically have to rule the entire world. Because not democracies are inherently fragile, and lead to persecution and tyrants springing up out of nowhere in order to control the population. The U.S. is very rare, is a unique place because there's so many different people, different ideologies that get along because we all are under the Christian values. And outside of the U.S., very rarely does a republic work without being extremely tyrannical. Even the European countries, they like to pretend like they're, some whole high mighty, liberal society, but really they depend on the U.S. to fund them. They don't sustain themselves. No independent country can in Europe can defend themselves against any other larger power like Russia or China. If Russia and China wanted to destroy Europe, they could. If not only because there's the U.S. funds them and they're so dependent. So without the U.S., Europe is nothing, because there's in Europe pre-1940 and really pre-World War I, most of Europe was major empires. You had like 5 big states in Europe that controlled Europe. You had the UK, you had France, you had Germany, and you had the Austro-Hungarian Empire. All right, and then you had like Russia and the Ottoman Empire. And not until the Ottoman Empire started to disintegrate with the rise of nationalism in the Balkans did you ever have really small states. You had the Scandinavian countries, and they were kind of fighting for all of history too. In fact, they were unified in different areas at some point. Sweden with Denmark, then you had Finland with Sweden. I think at one point you had Norway and Sweden were united, and then Estonia was Finnish of some kind. But really Finland was actually under the Russian Empire for a good portion of history. But there was a Finnish people group in Estonia and Finland, so they kind of are related to each other. So all this to say is, these micro national states, ethnic states in Europe are very they're unstable in the way of their ethnicity, and there's not enough people in those states to unify. That's why they have to team up with the whole European Union idea. The European Union is basically the new empire of Europe, with the rise of globalism and how in the modern era where a place like China with 1 billion people, or India with 1 billion people, Russia with 150 to 200 million people, all these countries, and the U.S. with 150 million people, or 300 million people, 350 million, give or take. With all these, large states, they can't compete. These larger states overwhelm the smaller states of Europe, and it's only a matter of time before you have another one, maybe like Brazil or something like that. So these European countries are running into that problem. So, anyways, so that's why it's always America, and is really one of the things I'm getting at is that America seems to have this hegemonic power that to act unilaterally for NATO, for the UN, and to stop, these rogue states or these terrorist groups, and that's not that I support it at all. That's really what I'm getting at, though, is that the U.S. should stop supporting these states. There's no or stop bombing these states. If this attack on the Houthis stops them from attacking commercial vessels, good. Okay, fine. He should have gone through Congress. I have to say that. Congress has to be the one to issue the approval to the military. They should issue a letters of marque or a limited action in this area, like we did with the Barbary States, and one of the first foreign actions that the U.S. Was involved in. There was one before that. I forget what it was. I remember hearing about it. It was a very small thing. It was very isolated. If I remember, I'll bring that up. But the Barbary States was like one of the first major overseas actions that the U.S. took under Thomas Jefferson. This was to the attack of commercial vessels, especially really specifically American vessels. They were this part of the world has always been so backwards because they would take these. They would attack these commercial vessels and then enslave their crews. So they would take the ship, sell the goods off, and then enslave the crew, and sell them into slavery. And so the U.S. In the early 1800s went off, and this is where the USS Constitution kind of was made, and that was really why the USS Constitution was made, is because we needed an overseas navy to protect our commercial shipping. The problem is that today the U.S. is all of the world's commercial shipping protector. Why isn't the U.K. involved in this? Why isn't the Netherlands or Germany or Poland or give random state they're shipping it's to protect a lot of the Asian shipping to Europe shipping. Most of the shipping for that would come from Europe would go, or from Asia to the U.S. would come through California, so they would go across the Pacific. But most of this isn't going to the U.S. I mean, some of it would, but most of it would go through to Europe. So why isn't Europe protecting their trade routes? Why is it always America doing it? That's one of the biggest questions I have. Now, some of my more libertarian friends would probably say that it was it's to help fund the military-industrial complex, which probably isn't wrong. The military-industrial complex needs always is hungry for money. So Thomas Massey made a post a while ago. This was before the bombing. That if all right, when we were done funding $15 billion a year in Afghanistan, we funded $50 billion in Ukraine. All right, and then now that we're stopping Ukraine, what was next? And this is the next step is the attacks in Yemen, in his view. Now, if it stops here, fine, whatever. Again, Congress needs to be the one to issue the letters of marque or whatever legal thing that is. But the president taking unilateral action can't be the solution. So, a little background on the civil war in Yemen. The Houthis have really been the Iranian-backed group. Iran doesn't claim to have relations with them, but that's what happens with covert operations. Is we don't have they make their own choices. It's kind of like super PACs with in American politics. Yeah, we have nothing to do with them. They support us, and we support them, but we have nothing to do with each other. And so with Yemen, the Yemen war really is dates back all the way down. Guess who? The British. So the port of Aden on the South Yemenis on the South Yemen coast was actually one of the only colonies in the Middle East that was actually a colony. A lot of Britain owned and France, controlled and had mandates and protectorates. Most of the Middle East was that during the 40s, after post World War war after the fall of the Ottoman Empire. These and the Sykes-Picot Agreement. A lot of these states were kind of carved up along ethnic lines. Basically, they didn't want any unified state in the area, right? So it was much easier to protect. Let's go with I don't know, Syria. Okay, so the reason Syria looks like the way it does is because it was under the French mandate. It was a French protectorate, and Iraq is carved up the way it is because of the same thing. And basically, these states were during the Sykes-Picot Agreement were carved up in such a way where you would have a balance of Sunni and Shia, or tribe and tribe, whatever tribe that may be. And so they kind of carved up these states in order to have and to better prevent a unification of under one ruler. And eventually they all did, especially post World War II. The Nazis really influenced Iraq during World War II in order to get their oil. That was a huge part of World War II, was trying to get them. In fact, Britain invaded Iraq fully from Kuwait. What is now Kuwait, rather, which was a protectorate back then, in order to prevent the shipping of oil to Nazi Germany during World War II. So there was a lot of same thing actually happened in Prussia, or sorry, not Prussia, Iran. I was thinking Persia. I had Persia on my mind. In fact, it was Persia back then, anyways. So they basically kind of overthrew the state and inserted a puppet there in order to protect Russia's southern flank. So a lot of that had to do, with geopolitics of wartime economies and stuff like that. But so after the decolonization that happened in the 60s and 70s, around the world, pretty much all of UK and France, were getting rid of their colonies. Colonies were uprising, all over Africa and all over Asia and the Middle East were all kind of becoming their own independent states. It was the rise of nationalism, worldwide nationalism, under a lot of dictators took over during that time. A lot of African atrocities happened during that time. You had the genocides that went on with the Rhodesians, which is now Zambia, or sorry, Zimbabwe, not Zambia, Zimbabwe, with the colonists that were there or the Europeans that were there. They had lived there for over 100, 200 years then at that point. These were a lot of the Boers during the Boer Wars. Those South Africans, Dutch South Africans, had fled to Rhodesia, and so nobody was innocent in those wars for sure. But the idea is Yemen during that time basically went under a unification war, and basically because of terrorist groups and different things and insurrection, and the UK was forced to grant them their freedom. In fact, the UK is the result of more Independence Days around the world than any other country. I find that funny. But anyways, so Yemen united under a single, really a Republican. They call it a Republican form of government, but a lot of Republican things end up being not U.S. Republican, but when it says a Republican army of sorts, that just means it's it's like People's Army. It really doesn't have a, it's a dictator usually leading the army, and that's end up being what's the problem. That's what makes the U.S. independence so unique, is that George Washington had a chance. He was offered to be a king. In fact, Alexander Hamilton, during the Constitutional Convention of the 1790s or late 1780s, after it was apparent that the Articles of Confederation weren't going to work, Alexander Hamilton actually suggested a constitutional monarchy, with Washington being the head. And basically, his idea was that this was not a hereditary monarchy; it was going to be an elected monarchy. The problem is that would immediately lead to and he was really the only large supporter of that. And I think he gave like an hour speech on why it should be that way. I don't like Alexander Hamilton, but that'll be a different story. Anyways, or a different episode. So, all during this time, you had you had George Washington able to be a dictator, and he willingly stepped down and went back to farming. That's why actually Cincinnati has the name it does, is because Ohio was becoming populated around that time, and it was named after Cincinnatus, who which is a reference to George Washington actually, because George Washington stepped down, and Cincinnatus was an 80-year-old dictator of Rome, elected dictator, to save the early Roman Republic against I think it was the Etruscans or the Samnites. I forget which one it was. Basically, they were able to. He was elected dictator to take control of the armies of Rome and defend and defeat their enemy. And after defeating the enemy, he willingly handed back the reins of power back to the Roman Senate. And that's where Cincinnati gets its name from. And it's all allusion to George Washington. Anyways, so the whole thing, all these dictators are set up in the mid 1950s to 1980s. Gaddafi, Assad, and Saddam Hussein. I think his father may have actually been the, Anyways, so you have all these dictators. The Shah in Iran. All these were kind of in power at the same, came to power, and they didn't really have strong militaries, so to speak, and they all had internal problems, and all these dictators did was kind of crush the problem with brute force and an iron fist, and the Islamic world has had this problem for centuries, since they've converted to Islam, really. Well, in fact, pre that, because Babylon and all these other states. Anyways, that part of the world has been an absolute mess for all of human history. And tribe conquers tribe, and suppresses and oppresses, and it's a fight over resources and stuff like that. And so that's why kings and strong empires actually developed in that region, is because one person took power and conquered the next state, whereas so because their resources are so limited there, that's why it demanded a cruel empire or emperor of sorts, king, to overthrow those areas. Whereas in Europe or in China, you had large populations. In India too, you had these large populations and these empires that would sprout up, but they weren't necessarily stable. The Persian Empire lasted 100, 200 years. Babylon only lasted 70, but and you really never had these major empires really in Europe, in the way of outlasting a couple generations. You had like Charlemagne, but these Charlemagne and the Holy Roman Empire and all these didn't really develop until the modern era. A lot of small duchies and stuff like that, ruling by dukes. So they had a loose conglomeration of power. Even so like under Charlemagne, even though you had an empire, you had a loose conglomeration of states underneath it. Whereas in the Middle East, you kind of had brutal force dictating all of that area. Whether it was the caliphates or these, you did have some city states that were really ruled by massive, strong figures. Like the word assassin comes from the old man of the mountain, the Ashish, and they were basically ruling by terrorists. That's where the word assassin comes from. So this part of the world has always been a total mess, since the beginning of time, and nothing is really going to change. Some people just don't have the culture for democracy. Democracies, the whole reason that the U.S. was able to develop under the way it is, instead of being 13 separate countries, they were able to unite. Is a lot of them were in reality fairly similar, mostly Protestant, mostly English, a little bit of Scots and Irish in there, but for the most part from the UK. What is now the UK. And Ireland. I don't want to assault Ireland like that. These these tribes are always fighting each other and for brutal power and whatnot. So basically, what I'm trying to get at though is the U.S. should really look at staying out of this mess. Protect commercial shipping, fine. The UK or the Europeans should really be doing that, or the Indians or Malaysians or wherever they're shipping from. Those two should really be colluding with each other to put away with this without the U.S. being directly involved every single time. So, on that note, ladies and gentlemen, I appreciate you for tuning in for episode number 11. If you like my podcast, if you please would subscribe to or follow my channel on Instagram or on Spotify rather. Follow the page, Facebook. On Facebook, it's called GapFillers Podcast. On X, it's GapFillers 1776. I appreciate it, and thank you. Have a good week.